Hello, as you heard, my name is Patrick Rodriguez, and I am going to be showing some workflows with SketchUp and SketchBook Pro. So as you can see here, this is like a concept painting illustration that I did. As you heard, my name is Patrick Rodriguez, and what you see before you here is an illustration that I've done using these techniques that I'm going to discuss with you today. So you've got SketchBook Pro, which is a great natural kind of illustration program, and you've got SketchUp, which is a 3D modeling program. What I'm going to be showing you today is SketchUp Make, which is actually the free version. So this is sort of geared towards people who are trying to do illustration and then add to that, and anyone else who can take away what they can. Now, this was done using the two programs, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to break it down and how I did it and everything. Okay, so let me just turn on my layers. I hit the Tab key. All right. Now, I'm just going to collapse those layers. Now, one of the newer things that they've added to SketchBook Pro is the ability to group your layers, which I'm using extensively here. So if you select a few layers and hit the Command G key, you can group them pretty easily there. So let's start with a blank page, and you'll notice that when you start up SketchBook Pro originally, it'll start at like 100 DPI or PPI, but you can change that pretty handily. I started sketching at the native resolution they gave, and I'll show you my sketch here. And all I've done here is sort of loosely sketch in. I wanted to draw this monster robot thing reaching between a few buildings. And then I scaled it up after I resized my image. And so this is looking a little blurry, and that's because when you resize an image from a smaller size to a larger size, it tries to fill in the pixels, and it just gets a little bit blurry, but no problem. As you'll just want to figure out what your final resolution is going to be as early on as you can. I try to work 11 by 17 at 300 DPI, so that if someone wants a poster or I want to zoom in, I have that flexibility. So, and my computer can handle it, so it's good, but it does make the files a little bit on the big side. So then I'm turning on this robot layer, and you can see that I was just trying to find shapes and just sort of had fun. That's the nice thing about Sketchbook, is that you can, I used a pencil tool from almost all of this so far, and I just changed the color. I think I used a Copic color, which you can find here, but I'm not really demonstrating the markers, but they're a great little addition to SketchBook Pro. Turning this off, that you get that through clicking on this button here under Copic Library. All right. So I try to work in layers as much as possible, and so you can see here I even use different colors to kind of separate the drawing, kind of just working the forms and trying to find a balance between good proportions and, I mean, it's an alien robot, so there doesn't necessarily need to be anatomy that's correct, but it needs to still be somewhat pleasing. And you can rotate the canvas as well. Okay, so let's turn on the rest. I have another layer with these helicopters, really just some scribbles to show the helicopters. Then I added in some tendrils. I wanted it to really come into camera and be right in your face. Uh-oh, I've got somebody is trying to get a hold of me. That's okay. So here we go. The idea is that you want to sketch this out, and then what we're going to do is, in order to bring this to the next level, you'll see that I've just used the pencil tool, but I just lowered the opacity here on my sketch. So I just you can select the group. This is the group that's the sketch. You can select the whole group by selecting the folder by clicking on it, so you get this little blue line. And then you can just come up here to your right next to pass-through at the top of this menu bar. You can see it says 100. That's the transparency. You can drag this down, and that makes the whole group transparency go down. So this is a really good way to work. You can just lower the transparency, and then you can make a new layer and draw over it, and then you've got a really good guide of where you're going, but at the same time you can get really detailed and whatnot. And let me show you what I mean by that. I have another group over here, and that's called pencils. So this is where I went in and I just sort of drew, just like I would in my sketchbook, trying to find forms. The nice thing about SketchBook Pro is that you can do things like these fingers here are all the same finger, and all I did was drew a marquee around them. And again, you can do that here in your with your lasso, and you can just draw around something. Like, let me just go down and show you where this is. This is my pencil group. Okay, and there's my robot pencils. Okay, so now that I'm on the correct layer, I can just use my lasso, just here, and I can just like grab this finger like this, and then I can hold down modifiers, which is nice. The Option key will turn it to negative. The Shift will add. So see how these things are changing without my cursor actually being over them? That's because I'm holding down Option to be subtract and then Shift to add. And so I can add some or I can subtract some. So I'm just interchangeably going from Option to subtract and then Shift to add. Okay, and then once I get the finger that I want to cut off and then maybe duplicate, all I've got to do is let's see here, is you can click, and it's a little bit, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but you don't have to right click actually. You just, over here in my layers palette, I just tap, and this little menu comes up, and this one here is duplicate layer. So I can duplicate that, or I can cut it. Actually, that is not, let's see here. Let's see here. I duplicated the layer, but what I wanted to do was to cut it. Let's see here. Layers. Let's see. Oh, I was in the wrong menu. Okay. So that's that. And then let's see. Okay. Sorry, I was just using Photoshop just last night, so things are getting a little bit scrambled in my brain here. But yep, you can duplicate your layer and whatnot. So let's see here. So that's where you would duplicate the whole layer if you wanted to. And I'll go over how you can. Maybe I'll remember how to cut and paste in a second here. But you can select things and then you can cut them and edit. Oh, there it is. Cut. Okay. And then you can go and edit. You can make a new layer. So like here, you could just say, you could hit this plus sign up here, or you can click here and say, just make a new layer, which is the green plus. And then on that new layer, you can go to edit and you can paste. Okay. So that's how you make a new object. So there it is. And you can duplicate it here, so then you can move that around. Okay. So there you can see the two different things. So I'm just going to undo that. A little brain fart there, sorry about that. Let me just undo. You do get multiple undos, which is quite nice. There it is, maximum undo 75. Okay. So, all right. Okay, so now I'm in this mode. This little X will allow me to get out of that mode. And I can hit the space bar to move around. And so it takes a little bit of getting used to this little hockey puck. I keep wanting to hit the Z key, but regardless, you have to hit the space bar, and then you get this menu, and then that's how you navigate around. All right, so here's my pencils. And let's see here. It looks like okay. So as you can see, the pencils are such that everything, you can see through the pencils. See, so I'm looking at these tendrils, but I can see the building behind it, and so that's no good for going into the next stage of painting. So what you need to do is add in flats. So what flats are I'm going to turn off my pencil layer and turn on my pencil and flats. And what flats are just flat areas that help separate the pencils from each other. All right, and that definitely helps with coloring. I think a really good way to paint in this program is to make a flat. So for instance, I'll go to these tendrils, and it says flats tendrils, and I'll turn them off and on to show you. And just go to that flat and then click on this little button here, which locks the transparency. Now a little thing that kind of got in my way a few times is that when you go to select an area, so if I go to my lasso, let's just say, and I select an area, if I then use my paint bucket and fill it, okay? Or let's see here, let's try this again. This one, lasso, select, paint bucket, fill. It doesn't respect the fact that I said preserve transparency. So that can be a little bit off-putting, but with this locked and with like a brush selected, it does respect the transparency. So just something to keep in mind. You know, it's just the way they've done it, so it's just kind of something to get used to. So there's the flats, and that's the reason why you make flats for an illustration like this. It's basically, I'm calling them flats just like they did it in comic book. They do in comic books. You lay out all these different shapes, and then that allows you to, for instance, if you wanted to, for these tendrils, for instance, you can just turn on the airbrush, and then you can just sort of paint, but you don't have to worry about painting outside the lines. So you can add, you know, highlights and lowlights, and you can really get in there and paint and basically scribble, and you don't have to worry about going outside the lines. All right. So I'm just going to get out of that, undo that. So that's how come you do flats. Now, let's look at this really quickly, and I just wanted to show you guys how I constructed this drawing. So the main focus of this is that the robot is something that I'm designing, that I'm creating out of my head. And I really like the idea that I can just sit almost like a sketchbook and just draw and spend some time noodling and finding forms and shapes. And that's all very fun to do. But when it comes to, say, this building over here or this lamp post, I'm not tasked in this imaginary task. I'm not tasked to design a lamp post or to design a building. Now, maybe if I was doing hold on, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Maybe if I was tasked to design a futuristic city, then I would definitely, you know, go in there and start noodling and trying to find forms and whatnot. And there's lots of different ways to do concept art. You can do it with sort of like kit bashing, but with photos. I think some people call it photo bombing or photo bashing or whatnot. But another way to go is just doing your doodling, and that's what I think of sketchbook when I think of a little napkin sketch that I'm doing, and or maybe a sketchbook that I have, like a physical one. But then this is the really a nice logical extension of that. Okay, so if you wanted to add in some elements that you're not designing, like for instance these helicopters, another good example, that's where I think SketchUp really shines and comes through, because you're not designing it, like I say, so you just need to fill in the area. You just need, like for instance in this illustration I'm doing here, I'm just trying to find some foreground elements, honestly, to create some vignetting and to create a nice composition, and to have, you know, to separate the foreground from the background, for the midground to the background and all of that. And nobody's giving me extra credit for drawing every last thing in here. So how did I get these in here? Well, there's two different ways that I did it. Let me just show you. I'll turn off these pencils and I'll show you my 3D reference. There's the foreground elements that I found in SketchUp, and then I traced over them. And a really good way to do that, especially when there's a lot of straight lines, is to use a ruler. And they've got a really great ruler in here, and that is this little icon here, which is the ruler. And you can see that you can position. These two are for positioning. Okay, and then this one was also positioning, but it allows the same angle. So you could say, let's just say I'll make a new layer real quick here, and on this layer I'll use my pencil, and I can just draw my straight line here. My color's a little on the light side, so I'll try that again. So I can draw a straight line really easily, and then I can move this and draw another one, move this and draw another one. So you can really use this just like a regular ruler, and then whenever you need to move it, you can. And I can line this up with points. And then what I did was I used my, I'm just going to throw this layer away for a second. What I did was I got my 3D reference and I turned it on. Turn off my pencils just to show you. And then you can take your opacity down. A really good way to get your pencil back to normal is to hit reset. And that's this little doohickey here at the top of your toolbar, and say save. That's the way they work, is that you don't make lots of different pencils and save them so much as they have your pencil. And you can make your own. Maybe we'll go over that in another session. So here you go. You draw your line, and then you can move this, and then draw another line, and you can go nuts. And you can make this really just like you were drawing it with a ruler. The really nice thing about this method is the tracing method, is that what you end up doing is marrying the drawing all in one. So if you're doing pencils for a comic book, it would all look like it was all the same illustration, and that's really nice. All right, so I'm going to turn off this ruler by clicking on the red X. And so that's how I made these parts. And then I'll just show you briefly how I made the 1-point perspective. And that's this really cool tool, which is here. And there's 1, 2, 3, and then there's fisheye perspective. So I'll just show you really quickly. When you do 1-point perspective, you get this little icon that looks like a little axis. And you just click and drag, and you can see how, as long as you're going in generally the right direction, you can get all of this for free. See how I'm getting, if I'm careful, I can actually, let's see, if I'll just draw like a little, fake building or something really quickly. So there you go. I can really quickly get a fairly competent like rectangle. And if I was drawing a building, maybe I would draw lots of windows going down the side of the building. And this is something that would just, even if you were using the ruler in this program, you'd still have to go in there and move the ruler. But this actually lets you snap, and that's this little magnifying glass here. If you turn this magnet off, magnifying glass, this magnet, if you turn that off, then you're just scribbling again. But if you turn it back on, then you're kind of, you're forced to draw in this kind of perspective. Now you can see that you kind of have to see how this is moving around, and so if you move your cursor in the right direction, then you're going great. Now, in 1-point perspective, left and or horizontal and vertical lines are all just, they're all just straight up and down. There's no perspective. And I'm just going to go to my layer here and go, let's see, edit clear. Clear is a good one. It just takes everything off the layer. It leaves the layer alone, but just wipes it out. So if we go to 2-point perspective, then you'll see you get 2 points. And then you could make, say you were drawing a box, you could draw it like this. And so you could get your 2 points. Okay, so I'll go to edit and clear, and then you've got your 3-point perspective. So that's getting even more complex drawing. You're able to do some crazy stuff. So you can get true 3D perspective drawing, whatever you're drawing, with this tool. And so it's really cool. It's really fun, and you're getting your true perspective. All right. But like I said, the reason why we're adding in SketchUp today is because sometimes you get these complex objects that you're just like, well, I don't really need to go and draw all that, and like there's an ellipse tool, and I can go in and I can use that, and I can really make a really nice, for instance, in this case, street light. So I'm just going to clear that. So that's the 1, 2, and 3. There's also the fisheye view, which is that's fun too. Basically you can if I click on this little eyeball here, you can see these little guides, but basically you can draw something in fisheye view. So very cool. It's a very cool little toy, and you can. And it's a very useful tool, I should say. So, really great thing to play with. All right, it's definitely the major selling point of this application for Sketchbook is this 1, 2, 3 and fisheye view perspective aid and the French curve as well as the French curve as well as the ellipse tool. So this is just great because you don't have to have, like, if you were to draw this in another vector program, you could definitely, make perfect lines, but this is just, it gives it such an organic feel. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see my pencil lines better, and you can really get a good feeling for how this is. Now, if you want to go to there's fit to view down here in the lagoon. They call this lagoon, but there's also an actual size. And if you go to actual size, then the pencils really look like they're supposed to. Again, but you can also make your pencil size bigger. This little puck here makes your size bigger and smaller, and this one's for color. Okay, so you can change your color. So this works very much like the perspective tool, and you can in that it locks you in a little bit there. And you can flip it here, and you can cycle through a bunch of different French curves, so that's great. And you can rotate them, of course, and you can shrink them and make them larger. And this little red X will make it go away. All right, so I'm just going to clear that real quick. All right, so we're sold that Sketchbook is a great application for doing naturalistic sketches and drawing. All right, but like I said, you're under a deadline, and you've got to get a bunch of pieces finished on your illustration, and you don't have time to, nobody's going to give you bonus points for drawing all kinds of things that you don't need. And using this technique of bringing it back and forth between SketchBook and SketchUp, you could save a lot of time and get some accurate perspective. Because yes, you can draw in perspective in SketchBook, but once you've drawn it, it's not now a 3D object. So now that I've shown you what you get when you're exporting from SketchUp, let's go look in SketchUp really quick before I run out of time, and let me show you what you can do in it. So let's just make a new scene real quick, and file new. Okay, and if you've never used a 3D program, you don't even need to know how to model, which is crazy. You can just go to File, 3D Warehouse, and go to Get Models, and then in this models, in this 3D Warehouse, you can actually just type in like building. So you could just say building and get a building, if it was a generic one. You can probably search for a lot of buildings and find things that you need. Like you could probably look for the Guggenheim here. It says the Empire State Building. So you could find a specific building. I'm wary to drag this one in because it may be really high resolution or something. But let's use my example of a street light. So you're looking for a street light. As you can see, plenty of street lights. Great. So you come and find one that you love or like, and let's see. Let's just get a simple example here. Let's just say this one is it. You can click right here, and that will immediately ask you if you want to download it into your scene, or you can just click on it, and then it opens it into this other window, which is quite nice because you can see a better representation of it. You can look at a lot of information on it, and then you can decide whether to download it or not. Okay, this one looks like it's 1.2 megabytes, not too big, not too bad. If I click right here on download, it'll ask me if I want to just bring it into the scene that I'm in right now, the SketchUp scene. So I'll say okay, and it loads it in, and it usually sticks to my mouse and I have to click on the origin. Okay, so now what do you do? Well, up here there's some navigation cues. This one here is orbit, pan, zoom, and then zoom extents. All right, so this looks like it's already sort of zoom extensed, if that's a word. It just means that it's framed up. So let's rotate around. Okay, so this orbit tool allows you to rotate. Okay, great. Now I only see the top of it. Well, this is where zoom extents really comes in handy. You just click once there, and it snaps everything into view. Okay, we'll rotate around. This is quite nice. So we could sit here and draw it, or hey, if this is what we really needed, then let's just put it into the angle that we want, and then boom, we'll just bring it in, right? So how do we do that? Well, the first thing you'll run into is this orbit tool sometimes isn't quite what you need. You need to be able to roll your camera, for instance. And so what I've found is that if you hold down the Option key, that you can roll your camera. And so in this way, we can kind of match up our perspective. So let me toggle back. I'm going to Command Tab back over to SketchBook. And I'm going to turn on my pencils and turn off this 3D reference. And you'll see that this is the kind of angle. In fact, I made a little note of where my perspective was. And that's really important to do, by the way, because every time you turn on the tool, it kind of snaps to center. So it's good to make a layer that you just set aside in SketchBook as like, okay, that's my perspective. But this is where my perspective is, right? So now what I'm going to do is tab back over to SketchUp. And then I can kind of see like, okay, oops, when you forget to hold down the Option key, it snaps you back into regular orbit mode. So it doesn't let you roll the camera. But if you hold down Option, you can roll the camera. Okay, great. And then we can hit the hand key up here and pan over. And you can see how I'm just sort of like positioning it generally in place. So I'll tab over to SketchBook and say, yeah, that looks pretty good. Sounds fine. And so what I could do is I could just say File. At this point, I could just say File, Export, 2D Graphic. Okay, and this little menu allows you to, I'm just going to move some things around here. As you can see, I could just say street light, okay, O2. And I like pings, and the reason why is because pings allow you to have transparency really easily. JPEGs do not, and I actually don't know if the TIFF here supports an alpha channel or something, but the ping has worked great for me. Under Options, you can see that if you set these numbers to the exact same, now forget about the 72, but just look at these pixels, 5100 by 3300 pixels. And so why is it why is it that those particular pixel numbers? Let me come over to SketchBook, and I'll show you under image size, it's virtually the same numbers. Okay, yeah, it's the same numbers. Great. And so the reason why I set those numbers to be the same is so that when I bring it back into SketchBook, the image will just be right there. So let's say okay here, and under options it says anti-alias and it says transparent background. Okay, so that's what we want, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm going to say export it in this folder. I have an export 2D folder, and I'm going to say export. Okay, takes a minute to render it. Now it's got color and it's got some texture. You might want that in your illustration, or you might not. Okay, it looks like it worked. Great. Now over here in SketchBook, I'm going to say cancel, and I'm just going to say File, Add Image. Okay, and so when I go to Add Image, it was Streetlight 2. Click on that and say Open, and then you'll see there it is. It's at the exact right pixel dimensions, so it's actually flush at the bottom. But I don't have to have it right here at the bottom. Now there is a lot of excess transparency that we didn't necessarily need, but that's not going to matter in anything. There's nothing there when we transform. I believe when we transform this, let's go to try transforming it. See, it just forgets about all that extra junk. It doesn't even matter, as you can see. So if I needed to, I can actually warp this a little. So if I was trying to put this in my drawing, I might say, you know what, I like it, but because we're just kind of making an illustration. We're not getting tested on how good our perspective is. We're just trying to make it look right. And if you line these things up in the 1-point perspective, it'll do a decent job. All right, so there it is. Now, I did that for these street lamps, and I did that for the helicopter, and that worked really well. But what about these buildings here? Let me just zoom in so I can show you how I did this. Now I'm just going to get rid of this layer. And let me just zoom in here and show you this building. This building, I actually didn't trace over. I actually just brought this in. Now this is kind of amazing if you think about it. I rendered these two buildings on the opposite corners in SketchUp. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. If you're in SketchUp, like I'll just use this lamp for example. Somebody's taken time to texture it, make it look nice and everything. But I'm going to close this window just because I want you to see where I got it. Under Window, you can go to let's see, Styles. Okay, so there's a Styles panel, and you probably here's the default styles. I'll even turn one so you can sort of see it. So there's like the default where you see the sky and you see the green grass or whatever if I rotate it down. But if you just go here under default styles, or this little pull down or drop down, you can see that there's sketchy edges. There's all kinds of different styles. So let's go under sketchy edges. The one I found under sketchy edges is down here. These two black ones. One right below it to the left here. Just click on this one. It changes everything. Now this worked really well for those skyscrapers, but is it really working for this? I'm not sure. It might work okay. I think I would play with it. You can modify these styles. This actually, when you start changing the styles, you can see that it actually incorporates things like, let's see, under View, you can see there's like face style, there's X-ray, there's wireframe, there's edge style here, so you can turn off the edges. So edge style. So it remembers all kinds of things, like for instance, the axes. So there's the axes, and go View, turn off the axes. So it actually remembers all of those things in the style, and you can just try out all kinds of different styles that they have here, and you can see that their intention is to make these things look like they are hand drawn. Okay, so then what you can do is just again go to File, Export 2D Graphic, and I think I'll just make this Streetlight 02, and I'll just put Alt Style. Okay, now I export that, exporting 2D Graphic. And then we'll pop back over into SketchBook. We'll go File, let's see, File, Add Image. Add Image, and there's just stretch this out a little bit, Street Alt Style, open. And now we can see that it didn't make a very good flat for us. We might have to draw that. In fact, maybe you can render this out, like save the 2D image as a colored, like a regular colored one, and then use that as your flat. And then you can make one like this to make it look like a drawing, because it looks black, but you can adjust the transparency down a little bit to match a little bit more gray, to look more like your pencil. And so you can get some really good and cheap work done with using SketchUp and SketchBook. So now you can go a lot further in SketchUp. You can model your own things. In fact, the building that I did, I modeled that building and then I added windows, but I didn't have to draw the windows. And drawing in SketchUp is very go away. The modeling in SketchUp is very simple to do. I mean, you've basically just like with Sketchbook, you've got kind of snapping tools and whatever. So you can click up here in the top-down view, and let's go into our default style for a second here. Okay, and let's just make a new file really quick, and you can say use this pencil tool, and you can draw straight lines and whatnot. And then, or you can do some really complex shapes. And then again, this would probably be for another presentation or whatnot. But the idea is that you can almost draw, but in 3D. Now, if I move this orbiting tool around a little bit, you can see that you've got some really cool abilities with this push-pull tool. So you can make things in 3D very quickly. Okay, but I think the real power, at least for people who are new to 3D, is that you can literally go from Sketchbook and then come into SketchUp, that you can download for free, SketchUp Make, and then after you've downloaded it for free, you can get right into the 3D warehouse and download all kinds of different models. They have like tanks and they have helicopters, and then you can use them for your illustrations and bring your illustrations to another level, I believe. So let's turn off the pencils here and turn off that layer. And now you can see my flats, and that's how I started painting. See, by having a flat area that you can paint on and by locking the transparency. Then I'll turn off that and turn on my painting layer. Then you can go in and I'll just show you really quick. Wow, look at that. Time is up. 35 minutes. I set an alarm for myself. Okay, not to go too long. So here you go. I'll just show you really quick what I did was, like for instance, with this lamp here. See, what I did was turning off this multiply layer. I have this flat here. Okay, so imagine this is my flat, and I'll just zoom in a little bit further so you can see it. So I locked the transparent pixels, but then I just shaded over a little bit, used my airbrush and kind of made parts darker and parts lighter. And then I added a layer on top of it. And in this case, I'll just turn off the multiply for a second, and I'll make it normal. And you can see that all I did was I selected the layer, and then what I did was I used my magic wand tool, W for magic wand, and you can just click. Sometimes it's easier to click the outside of an object than the inside, and then you can just let's see. Then I'll just add in a little bit like this and this and this. Okay, and this. So I'm basically making my selection here, and then I'll go to Edit and invert my selection, and then I can just use my paint bucket. I can just use a gradient here, and I can click and drag, and then I have a gradient that is reminiscent of a lot of other applications. You can literally change the color. You can eyedrop from like the background, which is what I did. Okay, you can add in another color into your gradient. You can keep moving this gradient around. Once I let go, however, I'm kind of locked in. So you definitely want to make the right call as you can, or else you have to select everything and try again. That's why I was selecting the outside, because if I went to try to select the inside, then it just depends on when you do that. When you do select things with the magic wand, you'll see that there's this little slider here that is sensitivity tolerance. So anyways, with this selected, I can change these colors, and I'll just show you again that I can real quickly. Let's say this is my gradient. I can throw away a color, slide this around. I'll double click here and I'll eyedrop like this color. Double click here and I'll eyedrop like a yellow, and then this back color here I'll make this dark, or I'll eyedrop something dark. And then what I did here was I'm hitting return to commit to the gradient, and then I'm hitting Command D to deselect the marching ants. And then I just change this layer to multiply. And then what it does is it keeps some of the color, but it also picks up some of the shading that I had before. All right. And I used the glow here, a soft glow over the top of everything. That kind of marries some things in. And I had painted in some of this and that. So in a nutshell, that's how I made this illustration. These trees are actually just photographs. I used there's a trick that if you search in Google and you put PNG in the Google search term, then you'll get a lot of objects that have transparency. So that works pretty well. And if this was going to be a production painting, maybe I'd stop. But like I said, if you were doing a series and you needed, like, say, this helicopter to be at different angles and whatnot, then you really could save a lot of time by using it. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I've enjoyed preparing for it and presenting it. I hope you learned a lot.